Is 6:30, so I guess that means it's time to start. Hopefully we have everyone here. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Ned Bowman. I'm an outreach coordinator and project biologist with Great Basin Bird Observatory. And as I'm going through my notes, I'm seeing that it was this very event last year that was our first ever webinar. So this is like our fifth now, so we're pretty much pros. This is the time of year where we come back from the fields, come back from the wilds, and share with you all what directions our research is taking, what projects we were involved in this past year. But so these presentations will not have any technical results. It's just too soon after field season. There's been no analysis of the data or anything like that yet. So that will come later at another series where we can go into more detail about some of the findings. But it's certainly been an interesting year. There's a time when we even thought we could hold this event in person and broadcast for our remote followers, but clearly that didn't work out. It's been interesting for the birds too, and you'll hear about that shortly. We had historic drought conditions in our area and saw evidence of that on most, if not all of our projects. But so before we really get started, I want to remind everyone that the annual WFO, Western Field Ornithologist meeting, is being held remotely via Zoom this year and starts tomorrow at 11 a.m. It's not too late to register. There's a number of neat sounding talks on the agenda, some fun sounding workshops and other stuff, some California spotted owls and fire, buff-breasted sandpiper migration, pollinators and meadow restoration in the Sierra. There's an iNaturalist workshop. John Dunn's going to talk shorebirds, lots of cool stuff. So that link down at the bottom, if that works, you can use to register. So this evening you'll hear from several of our coordinators, and if you have any questions during their presentations, you can type into the chat window. There's a Q&A function and a raise hand button at the bottom with your other Zoom controls. But just note, since they're all pretty short, I'll just hold the questions till the end of each presentation, and then in between each presenter, we'll pause for questions on that presentation. Tonight's event will be recorded, so you can check it out on our YouTube channel, Great Basin Bird Observatory, later on. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Dawn Fletcher, who will talk about some new developments in our ongoing research with desert thrashers. So here comes Dawn.
Hey there. One second, let me just get my screen up and going here. Okay. Thanks so much, Ned, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for attending this evening. So tonight I'm going to be talking to you guys about the Thrasher surveys that we conducted this year in Nevada. So briefly, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the project. So our target species for this project are the Lacons, benders, thrashers, as well as loggerhead shrikes. But I won't be presenting on loggerhead shrikes this evening. So I'm just going to really be talking about thrashers here. And the thrashers themselves haven't been adequately been able to be surveyed through larger scale monitoring programs such as BBS. And these species have been recognized by Partners in Flight as species at risk. So over the last 50 years, their populations have declined significantly, with Lacons declining at about a 67% rate, and benders declined about 90% since 1970. So our surveys are part of a region-wide effort, and these surveys have occurred in Nevada, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and within the last year, even in Sonora, Mexico. And our surveys have been conducted within the region since 2017. However, this is the first year since 2018 that Nevada has been able to conduct surveys. So as I mentioned, these surveys are part of like a larger group effort. And so in 2011, the Desert Thrasher Working Group was established. And it was established in an effort to address these long-term steep declines of the thrashers, as well as we wanted to promote knowledge about these birds and develop research programs and monitoring for these species. And then the Desert Thrasher Working Group was revitalized in 2016, kind of amping up for these surveys to start in 2017. And the group is part of a bunch of different organizations and partnerships, and some of these organizations are shown here on the screen. So the purpose of our surveys and our objectives were to test our survey methods and sampling design. I'm going to go over our survey methods and sampling design briefly over the next couple of slides. And then we wanted to develop habitat suitability models from our field assessments to provide guidance on how to best manage these species. And then eventually we would like to estimate density and population sizes for these birds. So we decided on the area search survey method in part because Point Blue Conservation Science successfully surveyed for LeConte's thrashers using this method. And we decided to do a stratified random sampling design with the majority of our surveys around 60% in the highest suitability habitat for these species as defined by habitat suitability models created by Point Blue Conservation Science. Our plot sizes were 300 meters by 300 meters, and they're designed to be surveyed 3 times during the breeding season. And we record all birds seen and heard on the plot during our time delimited survey, which is 40 minutes. But we do focus on those 3 target species. And this is just an example of how we would survey our plot. We like to pass within 50 meters of all points on our plot. We also perform habitat evaluations on our plots. So we take measurements at the center point of our plot using the point center quarter method. We record density and estimates of cholla species, yucca trees and shrubs, and then we do total counts of fruit-bearing shrubs and trees, and we record bunch grass and invasive weeds as well. Yeah, and that up here in the corner, we're just showing you the point center quarter method, and where you do transects within each quadrant from the center point. So our 2021 survey results. This past field season, we were able to survey 94 plots, and we did 275 surveys. So most of our plots we were able to survey 3 times during the breeding season, but a few of them we were only able to survey twice, and we only actually had 24 detections of LeConte's thrashers this year, and no detections of, well, we had an unconfirmed detection of Bender's thrasher. So the points here in blue are survey plots, and as you can see, most of our survey plots fall within the southern portion of Clark County, and that's because that's where the majority of the best habitat for these species is found according to the habitat suitability model. And then the yellow dots here are the LeConte's thrasher detections. So as I mentioned, we had 24 detections of LeConte's, and that was 12 plots occupied, and we didn't find any nests this season. And as I said, we had just 1 unconfirmed detection of Bender's thrashers, and we had 0 plots occupied and 0 nests. So we did detect 87 other species of birds, and that was like 1,200 detections approximately. 13 plots had absolutely no birds observed. And our top species by far was the black-throated sparrows. We had 362 birds recorded, and then horned larks, we had 141, house finches 50, and brewer sparrows 29. And then the rest of the species were kind of in the teens for total observations. So I just wanted to show you here our past detections of thrashers, just so you could get a sense for how these surveys compare to prior seasons. And I know there's kind of a gap here since we haven't surveyed since 2018, but you can see, I mean, obviously in 2017, we did actually survey a lot more plots, but we had a lot of detections of LeConte's thrashers. We had 310, and we had 16 detections of bender thrashers. And then in 2018, we actually surveyed a similar number of plots. We surveyed 126, and so just 30 more in 2018. And we had significantly more LeConte detections. We had 280 as opposed to our 24 this season. And then we had 27 benders detections. So we speculate, and as Ned mentioned, that the drought is really has really impacted these birds, especially this season. Surveyors noted that many species didn't appear to breed at all, and overall species numbers were down. Arizona's numbers were low as well this year. However, alternatively, California's had a lot of threshers that were breeding, which we feel that this highlights the importance of doing region-wide surveys for these birds, just to kind of get a sense for what's going on in other areas within the species range. And here, I'm just kind of showing you a map of the surveys we've done in the past throughout the Mojave Basin and Range ecoregion. So you can see we have a lot of survey effort, and we've had a lot of detections of birds, so it's a good comparison to this past season. And then I just wanted to acknowledge the following agencies and people for helping out with this project. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Dawn.
Thank you.
Next up, well, do we have any questions? I don't see anything in the chat here. No hands raised, so assume everyone got that. Then all right, we'll go on to Lauren Harter. She's going to talk about our continued work on the lower Colorado River, as well as some monitoring of other riparian areas in Arizona. And so here is Lauren.
Ned, and thanks everybody for being here. Pull up my presentation here. Right, I'm going to give an update on our riparian bird surveys along the lower Colorado River first. This is the project you may know as LCR, as we often refer to it. For those who aren't familiar with the project, this is a contract with the Bureau of Reclamation, Lower Colorado River Multi-Species Conservation Program. And we survey in riparian areas spanning the length of the lower Colorado River. And I want to pause there and mention one interesting thing is this actually was a project that we didn't at least notice an obvious effect of drought. When we look at the data, we may well notice an effect. But in these riparian areas, at least on the Colorado River, where water is much more controlled, it was a little bit more business as usual, at least compared to some of the striking results we saw in some of our other projects. And going back to the breakdown, these surveys for the LCR MSCP, these bird surveys have been conducted since 2007, and GBBO has been involved in most years since 2008. This map shows the LCR MSCP planning area in Nevada, California, and Arizona. Our survey area is a little bit different. We don't actually survey along Lake Mead, but we survey the rest of this area. And our surveys this year were all between Laughlin and Yuma, as well as a short way up some major tributaries, the Bill Williams River and the Gila River. Our methods. These surveys are conducted on randomly selected plots, both in managed conservation areas that are part of the program, as well as system-wide plots. So those would be any woody habitat that would just be randomly selected throughout that planning area. And with these surveys, we can track populations over time and look at habitat use, which is especially important for those conservation areas. We can look at what areas are being used by the species of interest to the program. And that provides great information for the managers of those conservation areas. Our surveys are also conducted on this project using the area search survey method. So over the course of one morning, a surveyor will walk all around a plot that looks like this, and they'll record all of the territorial birds that they find and do as much territory mapping as they're able over the course of that morning. And we do record the data electronically. So then after the season, the surveyor will conduct either 2 or 8 visits to the plot, depending on the type of survey. And then at the end of the season, you get an electronic map that looks something like this, with all of the observations of all of those territorial bird species over the course of the season. And then using that information, each surveyor will map out territory boundaries based on the information that they've gathered. So this, for example, shows the black-tailed gnatcatcher territories on this plot. So we can see 3 gnatcatcher territories on this plot. Some fun highlights that aren't really connected to the surveys, but fun things from the survey season. This spiffy long-tailed duck lingered at the Bill Williams River National Wildlife Refuge headquarters early in the season, and I think most of the crew got to see him. And I just love this picture. Both of these are by Bobby Wilcox, but this northern parula is a really snazzy individual, and any day is a good day when you see a parula in the West. I'm going to go into just a couple of preliminary results. We conducted 384 surveys this year on 160 plots and recorded over 21,000 bird locations. And interesting thing, the number is eerily similar to the number of locations that we recorded in 2020. Surveyors delineated almost 4,000 territories and recorded 35 territorial species. I want to take a closer look at the Gila woodpecker. This species is covered under the LCR MSCP, and it's one of the focal species for this project. We have 6 focal species that we really concentrate on in addition to recording all territorial species. And this one is really interesting to look at for our long-term monitoring on this project, because Gila woodpeckers require mature trees or similar structures to nest in, and they also forage in larger trees. So they take a little bit more time than other species to come into these planted conservation areas. Shown here is the Laguna Division Conservation Area, which is in Arizona, just north of Yuma. The northern reach here on the left was planted in 2012. The southern reach here was planted in 2013. We hadn't recorded Gila woodpeckers using the conservation area until last year. In 2020, we had 1 territory in this area. And this year we had 3 territories using the conservation area, as well as 1 right outside it. So this area isn't actually at LDCA, but it's close. And then it's hard to see, but this pink one here is a territory. Here in the northern reach, I noticed that all of the territories extend to the other side of the Colorado River here, where there are some larger trees where perhaps the birds are nesting and then moving out onto the conservation area to feed. And it's likely that the birds were feeding in here and nesting elsewhere because this area does not have a lot of large trees. So it is interesting doing this long-term monitoring, watching the way these species move in and utilize the habitats over the years. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk briefly about our riparian bird surveys across Arizona this year. This project is part of long-term monitoring that's done by Arizona Game and Fish Department. They focus on 3 habitat types: riparian, Sonoran desert, and grasslands. So these surveys were done in riparian areas throughout Arizona with a methodology that's based on the LCR project. So it's very similar just with a couple of tweaks that gets at the monitoring goals of the Arizona Game and Fish Department. We had 2 GBBO surveyors and 1 Arizona Game and Fish surveyor out this year, surveyed 49 plots. Most of them they were able to survey twice, as is the goal in the survey method. There were a couple that people weren't able to get back to, unfortunately, because of wildfires later in the season, which I'm sure most people out there can relate to. The surveyors recorded just over 11,000 bird locations. And my interesting tidbit for this project is that surveyors recorded 166 breeding species, which is a little over half of Arizona's breeding species, which I think is pretty impressive for 49 plots based really in one habitat type. With that, I just want to acknowledge our amazing crews. They went through a lot this year, especially with COVID messing everything up again. But they went out there and they got it done, and none of this would be possible without these folks. And I'd also like to acknowledge our partners at the Bureau of Reclamation and Arizona Game and Fish Department, and also shout out to Dawn, who's the co-project manager and put together a lot of this PowerPoint. And thank you all for listening.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Lauren. One second here. Next up, we have Jen Ballard's presentation, and I am going to play that video recording of it that she sent me due to concerns about the internet here. So let me do that. Okay, and here we go.
Hi, I'm Jen Ballard. I'm the monitoring coordinator.
Hang on one second. Okay.
Hi, I'm Jen Ballard. I'm the monitoring coordinator here with GBBO, and I'll be talking about our landbird monitoring program, particularly what we were able to accomplish in 2021. So first I'll talk a bit about the Nevada Bird Count, which is a statewide framework for bird monitoring, particularly point counts, and it also serves as an umbrella incorporating multiple projects. Then I'll move to our IMBCR program, which is integrated monitoring of bird conservation regions. And lastly, I will talk a bit about our work down at Las Vegas Wash. The Nevada Bird Count primarily consists of point count surveys, but it also includes other survey methods, particularly area searches. The program was established in 2002 with statewide coverage by point counts. That statewide random coverage was particularly dominant in the early years of the program. In more recent years, coverage has been more project-oriented. We now have more than 1,100 transects across the main habitats in Nevada, and it also serves as an archive of data collected by GBBO, but also by several of our partners. In 2021, we worked primarily on 2 projects, one along the Truckee River and one at Meadows National Wildlife Refuge. Our Truckee River project is downriver from Reno all the way down to Pyramid Lake. This project is led by the Nature Conservancy, who's been doing a lot of restoration work between Lockwood and USA Parkway, most particularly at their McCarran Ranch property. So this project consists of transects along that restoration reach, as well as a control reach on Pyramid Lake Paiute tribal lands between Wadsworth and Pyramid Lake. These surveys began in the late 1990s, and we are currently surveying 10 transects twice a year, once in late May, early June, and a second time in late June and early July. We also have 2 intensive area search plots where we conduct territory mapping, one on their Upper McCarran restoration area, and a second one at an oxbow on the lowest reach of McCarran Ranch that was burned in 2016. I don't have any data to share with you from our 2021 surveys at this point, but I would like to highlight the incredible growth of young cottonwood seedlings that has occurred since the high water flows in spring of 2017 and 2018. And so this is functionally the exact same view in 2015 and 2021. It's just that some of those young cottonwood seedlings are now taller than I am, and they are obscuring those gallery cottonwoods there in the back. So it is very exciting, and we are currently seeing the bird community respond to this increase in structure. We also conducted surveys at Ash Meadows National Wildlife Refuge, northwest of Las Vegas. Our surveys at Ash Meadows began in 2003 and have continued periodically through 2021. We have 8 transects that we survey regularly, although in some years we only survey half of those. So in 2021, we surveyed 4 transects twice, once in late April, early May, and again in late May, early June. We haven't yet looked through the data from 2021, but through 2020, these 4 transects supported 120 bird species, including 28 conservation priorities. Our analyses through 2019 indicated that Gambel's quail and Lucy's warblers, both conservation priority species, have significantly increased in recent years relative to earlier on in the project from 2007 to 2010. IMBCR stands for the Integrated Monitoring of Bird Conservation Regions, and this is a regional sampling framework where we are partnering with other bird observatories in the West, including Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, Intermountain Bird Observatory, Klamath Bird Observatory, and Point Blue. And so these are point counts, but instead of surveying transects, we're actually surveying a grid of points. So the surveys for the IMBCR are geared towards sampling bird conservation regions, and these are ecologically distinct regions in North America with similar bird communities, habitats, and management issues. And so we're working in BCR 9, which is the Great Basin, 15 in the Sierra Nevada, and 33 in the Northern Mojave Desert. During our surveys in Nevada and Eastern California, we conducted 88 surveys of BCR 9 in BLM lands and 21 surveys in BCRs 9, 15, and 33 on Forest Service lands. We are still in the data entry and proofing stage, so we have no analyses yet, but it was a dry year this year. And so we are looking forward to investigating drought impacts on species now that we've accumulated several years of data on these points. Lastly, we have our Las Vegas Wash project, which is located in the eastern part of Las Vegas Valley. Las Vegas Wash was originally an ephemeral wash, but a wastewater treatment plant was constructed at its head. And so between the discharge of that treated wastewater and urban runoff, it created riparian and wetland habitats. But beginning in the 70s, that increased flow started to result in downcutting, loss of wetlands, and moving an enormous amount of sediment downstream to the Colorado River. So Southern Nevada Water Authority began a restoration project, putting in more than 19 weirs, removing most of the tamarisk, and re-vegging with native species. Bird monitoring began there in 2005, starting with San Bernardino County Museum. We continued on starting in 2009, conducting point count surveys along almost 9 kilometers of the wash, surveying every 2 weeks throughout the year. We are still working on our 2020 to 21 data collection. So those analyses haven't yet started. But as of the 2019 to 2020 analyses, we had detected 237 species along the wash, including 57 conservation priorities. Richness and abundance have increased significantly since the surveys began. And this is primarily due to the increased open water and wetland habitat that the weirs have created. And also because of that, the largest changes have actually occurred outside of the breeding season. And that's one of the most important lessons, I think, of this project is the need to look beyond just the breeding season for determining impacts of projects. And with that, I would like to thank the many wonderful surveyors that we have had on the Nevada Bird Count and IMBCR crew, along with the Bureau of Land Management, the Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe, Southern Nevada Water Authority, the Nature Conservancy, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Forest Service, the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, Point Blue, and Klamath Bird Observatory. And with that, if y'all have any questions, I would love to try and answer them.
Well, I do not see any questions. So thank you, Jen. Now, no questions. All right, now we have Kayla going to talk about one of our newest projects, monitoring breeding birds in the Owens River Valley near Bishop, California. So I will turn it over to her.
Hi, everybody. Just 1 second while I get my screen shared here. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kayla Henry, and I coordinated this project along with Kelly Colgrove. I'm going to be talking about our Owens River Valley Riparian project. This project is a continuation of the work done by California Department of Fish and Wildlife in Point Blue, where southwestern willow flycatcher and yellow-billed cuckoo surveys were conducted from 2014 to 2016. We are continuing this project this year by conducting riparian bird point counts, southwestern willow flycatcher surveys, which you'll hear me refer to as Swifels for most of this presentation for ease, and yellow-billed cuckoo surveys. Other species of concern in the area, in addition to swifels and yellow-billed cuckoos, are leaf-spells vireo, summer tanager, yellow warbler, vermilion flycatcher, Lucy's warbler, and yellow-breasted chat. Project objectives for this year were to conduct Swifel breeding season occupancy surveys using call playback, as well as nest monitoring for success and parasitism rates. To study breeding season occupancy of riparian birds using point counts, and to conduct surveys for yellow-billed cuckoos, and to collect vegetation data. We had 10 survey transects for point counts along the Owens River. Swifel surveys were conducted along Horton Creek, which is this northern part of the Owens River here, highlighted in the green polygon. And yellow-billed cuckoo surveys were conducted on the southern portion here, just north of the Chinimaha Reservoir. And these survey areas were selected based on information gained by that study done by CDFW and Point Blue from 2014 to 2016. We conducted 8-minute point counts along 10 transects. Each transect was surveyed 3 times. Surveys started within a half hour of sunrise, but we typically tried to start 30 minutes before just because it was getting so warm down there early in the day. We recorded incidental species heard before and after the official count, and exact distances were recorded for all birds. For Swimful Surveys, 3 rounds of call playback surveys were conducted by Southern Sierra Research Institute. And this was followed by nest searching in areas where swifels were detected. Nests were then checked every 3 to 4 days to monitor success and failure. Southern Sierra was really great to work with and allowed us folks from GBBO to join them on surveys and gain experience working with this species. So that was great. Here's just a couple of fun pictures from nest searching for swifels. As you can see, it's really thick in here in the willows. You can see one of somebody in there. And we have a nest here, which when you figure out what you're looking for, gets a little bit easier, but they're still very tricky to find, even with flagging tape that we put up. Yellow-billed cuckoo surveys were conducted 4 times over the course of the season by Meadows Halterman, and these were done between mid-June and early August. These surveys were focused along a small portion of the south end of the Owens River. These are just some preliminary results here. We actually just finished up surveys, our last nest checks for swifels a couple weeks ago, so we are still very much in the processing data mode, but just some preliminary results for you guys. We had a total of 83 species recorded on our point counts and a grand total of 2,796 birds recorded during point counts. Bell's vireo was one of the birds we were curious if we were going to detect, and we did not. And if you're familiar with Bell's vireos and their song, you know they're pretty unmistakable and hard to miss in the field. Our most recorded bird was brown-headed cowbirds. They were the most recorded species after red-winged blackbirds, I'm sorry. As far as swifels and cuckoos go, we had 11 swifel nests. They were all in willows. 5 of those nests had cowbird eggs or nestlings. We had 6 nests with swifel nestlings, and they were presumed to be successful. And we ended up with 1 yellow-billed cuckoo detection in the area, and that was still pretty exciting. We're already looking forward to this project next year. It was a really beautiful place to work. I'd like to give a special thanks to Mary Whitfield and everybody at Southern Sierra Research Institute for doing these swifel surveys and sharing their knowledge with us, and also Meadows Halterman for teaching us a little bit about yellow-billed cuckoos and helping make this season a success. So thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kayla. Does everyone for tuning in? Tonight's event has been recorded, and you can find it on YouTube tomorrow or the next day when I get it up there. Our YouTube channel is great. And don't forget to register for WFO tomorrow. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for on our website, social media for our next showing. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.